he was an amazing. Always heard that you get to pick, and when you do an event with the Concerned Veterans for America, and you get to hang out with some of the people that are involved with this amazing organization, it's no secret. Just one event, you make a whole new family, and that's how I feel about Jason. In fact, you heard me talk a few times last week about the underground movement and about his new clothing line. Man, it's dope. You guys need to go check that out. It's tumshirts.com. There's a plug for Jason, but Jason is more than that. Jason has been advocating for veterans issues, and I know Jason. When Jason went to speak, friends are the family issues, but when it comes to America, none of those issues will matter if our nation is taken over. Jason Beardsley joins us now to talk about some of those things. Jason, what's up, man?
And Andrew, thanks so much for having me on. And you said it, I'm fired up. We've got a lot of work to do to make sure the Republic, the greatest country in the history of the world, is not just preserved, but we leave it in a better place than what we found it. So that's kind of the work. That's the mission. And those men and women who have served honorably, taken the oath and sworn to protect this country against enemies, foreign and domestic. Well, part of that responsibility includes engaging in the civic dialogue. That's what we have to do. You get done with service in Iraq and Afghanistan, there's nothing more important than making sure you pour your energies back here in your homeland, back in your communities where your kids grow up, where your wives and your husbands live. That's the important thing. That's what fires me up now. And it requires guts. It requires a little bit of grit. And it's a battlefield because politics is a little bit dirty. So you can't go in there all naive and kind of thin-skinned and, wearing your emotions on your sleeve. You got to go in there with a little bit of grit and a little bit of gumption to get through this. So that kind of drives me, it kind of fires me up. And man, I love working with and meeting great folks who kind of get that and are doing everything they can, which is what you're doing in the intersection, to kind of preach out what is America looking for? What do we need to do to make this continue to be the greatest country in the history of the world? That's what we got to do.
So when we think about the greatest country in the world, one of the things that has made us the greatest countries in the world is liberty. It's freedom, right? But at the same time, one of the things that has brought us to the top of being amazing, one of the things that has brought us the aspects and the definitions of American exceptionalism is our military. And, back when we had individuals, men of valor that were leading our nation, man, you didn't have any of these issues with the things like terrorism on American soil, like at San Bernardino. Those things don't happen. I can unsafety of America and fighting force in the world, rather. So when you think about all of these things that are going on in our world today and how much closer terrorism is coming to fruition here within our homeland, we have work to do. Now, one of the things that I've said before is if our government continues the path that it has and does not and refuses to continue to take care of our veterans the way that they deserve to be taken care of, America is effectively, if our government keeps going the direction the way it's going, our government is effectively enabling and angering the strongest tactically trained militia that the world has ever seen before in those veterans. But veterans aren't involved, man. How do we get veterans involved in doing this, in redefining this process?
Right. Outstanding question, lead up, Andrew. I mean, you rolled that in together in a couple of nice pieces. One, let's understand who our veterans are. You talked about it, but these are men and women that have served honorably and done their best to uplift the honor of the American Republic. They've done it overseas in the face of enemies. And what we've seen is as they've come back, or even in the midst of these wars, it's our politicians who have betrayed that honor consistently. Leadership at the top of our political spectrum, if you will, has failed our men and women. Now, if you think about the oath we took to protect and defend, the oath is kind of a two-way oath. It's like a marriage vow, right? We promise to remain faithful and uplift our vows. And the U.S. government kind of does the same back. Hey, we're going to take care of you. And we stated that if we break our service members, our widows, our soldiers, we'll help to bear the burdens, help to kind of lift them up. Now that they've come back into society, the United States government is breaking their side of the bow. And that's leaving a lot of our veterans in despondency or in despair. We're losing 22 a day to suicide. Those are just the numbers recorded. So when we look at our veteran population, number one, they're coming back after having been betrayed by our politicians in a war, 2 wars really, and more if you kind of count the periphery, wars that we haven't been allowed to win. You know, we've been handcuffed. We've been asked to constrain the rules of engagement. We've been restricted on how we can go after the enemy. And our politicians have not defined a clear path towards victory. Now you get that population back in their communities, and you find that they're upset. They're a little bit jaded, too, because they've already been dismissed based on the service that they provided the nation. They want to know, why should we get involved? Now, Concerned Veterans for America, you mentioned the Defend Freedom Tour. This is a group of patriots. Some are veterans, some are families that support veterans, people that have lost sons and daughters in war. And we've gathered together to, coalesce that group to make sure there's a dialogue and a voice that is the considered sort of veteran bloc voice in our political spectrum. Not easy to do, but what it really requires is we literally have to get out there, build relationships with these men and women that are suffering, that are hurting, that bore that burden of battle, if you will, and bring them back into community action. And it's almost like grabbing your soldier, grabbing your Marine by the neck collar and saying, hey, Sergeant, hey, Private, hey, Captain, your service isn't over. Just because you did that honorably in your 4 years, your 10 years, your 20 years, however long, it doesn't mean you stop service when you sign your DD-214. So our mission is to ensure that those great veterans don't just end their service at the end of their military service, but they continue that back in the community. It's so important because America is where the battlefield is now. Our civic community is where we have to get them engaged. And I'll just tell you this too, it's working. Every day in the news you can watch, when we talk about issues, whether it's the Veterans Administration that's had abysmal failures, systemic failures, or whether it's about national defense, our policies, when we talk, it's getting into the dialogue, and that has to happen. No better group to be inside that political dialogue than veterans.
Jason, if I might,
yeah,
I think you're being too nice. Okay, our heroes, and that's what I call our military. Our heroes put their lives on the line, put their families behind them. I mean, what's worse than being away from your family? And their families had to go through you going overseas.
You're right.
And our country, our leaders have put them on the back burner. You know, they keep saying, well, we don't have money for this, we don't have money for that. Well, we don't. Yeah. But it's priorities, okay? Right. We don't have to spend money to integrate 100,000 people coming from the Sudan. But but it's more important to have money to take care of these people who we made a promise. You go out and protect our families, and we're going to take care of you and your families the rest of your life. Okay? And it's not like, you know, it's not like putting someone on welfare. It's like helping them school, helping them get jobs if they're injured, helping them get healthy or helping them deal with their injuries. Okay, but that is our first priority. To me, that is as much national defense as any action going to prevent terrorism. Okay,
right. You're right.
It's not a matter of keeping people happy. Okay. It's a matter of fulfilling the obligation that we made when we asked you and all the other veterans to put your arses online and protect my family.
Right. Hey, man, listen, you're right. I deployed. I left my family behind. I've got 3 daughters, a beautiful wife, been married almost 20 years now.
Got a shotgun for the daughters?
What's that?
Got a shotgun to protect daughters?
Yeah, no, you know, I use counter-terrorist tactics here at the house to make sure they're protected.
There you go.
So, everything I learned, but the truth is, when we go overseas, We are. We're separating from our families. It's a pain every time. When we come back, though, we protect them. And what you're talking about, again, it's a bit of that oath I talked about. We share our oath with the United States government, and we believe with fidelity that we can lean on the United States government to fulfill their obligation to care for the veteran. It's not an entitlement. It's not a benefit. This is an obligation. It's part of that vow. If we broke you overseas, we owe you something. Now, Concerned Veterans for America for 3 or 4 years has been talking about this, our wait list, the scandals, people that had died in Phoenix. Just as soon as recent as 2 weeks ago, we've got the Secretary of the Veterans Affairs talking about waiting in line for your health care benefits. That's no different than waiting in line for a ride at Disney World. Well, that's a shame, and it's a dismissal, and it marginalizes our veterans. Now, you're right. Being too nice, we don't want to let these guys off the hook. This is a two-part story, though. And what I'll tell you is that our veterans know this better than anyone else. Our leadership, our political leadership, they're going to fail every time we let them. Okay? I'll repeat that. Every time we let our political leaders fail, they will fail us. The American Republic was built to have engagement from the constituency. So if the constituency, if the base, if the voters, if the veterans are not involved, are not holding their feet to the fire, we have to expect that these politicians will fail. It's not because they're naturally bad or malicious or they're trying to do it on purpose. It's because governments and bureaucracies are big and they're lethargic. They have a difficult time with flexibility and nimbleness caring for our veterans. Now, one of the ways we fix that is by ensuring that every place we can, particularly when we are caring for our veterans, we keep the government as reduced, as minimized as possible, and allow those veterans, allow those constituents to be cared for at the most flexible, most, we'll call it efficacious method, the most effective method. What we've talked about in the Veterans Affairs is allowing these veterans simply, think about this, to have choice. I mean, right now, if you're being denied choice as a veteran, where you get your health care, how awkward is that? You volunteered to go into the service, you volunteered to serve your country. Now you come back home, you can't choose your doctor, you can't choose where to get your health care. You're mandated to go to a monopolized system. How do we break that monopoly? It's by tweaks in the legislation to let those veterans determine where they're best taken care of. That's how you kind of minimize and get government out of the way. I say that because I don't want people out there to think in your audience, you got a smart audience. We don't want them thinking, yeah, hey, all I have to do is rely on the government. They're going to take care of this. We've watched it fail. We know the history of republics, and we understand that if the citizen is not involved, if the people are not involved, which is what this program's about, then we're going to lose those leaders. They are not going to back us up. So the real requirement is to get people involved, have their voice in the civic dialogue. That's what this is about. Otherwise, unless you get exceptional leadership consistently, you can't expect much from them. So that's my cause too. Don't let people sit back and think, hey, let someone else take care of this. This is our job to take care of. It's no different than taking a beachhead, taking a city. We need a raid on Congress, a raid on Capitol Hill. It has to happen almost every year. We're in the middle of doing Vets on the Hill right now. About 150 volunteers from Concerned Veterans for America that are actually inside, a couple hundred meetings this week to make sure our legislators hear our concerns.
Here's a couple things, Jason, that I think, and you just nailed it right at the end. You said it's up to the people. And in America right now, there's an extreme lack of patriotism in this country, an extreme lack of concern for our fellow veterans. I mean, we've got more people, and then when it comes to the government, we've got people getting on social welfare, but there's more people receiving from the government who are doing nothing for themselves to better themselves. And I'm not putting everybody in that category, but then the government being concerned about its veterans and having programs and things like that in order to assist them. I could go right up to and apply for welfare and be approved and get all my benefits, get everything that I need. But a veteran struggles to do the same thing when he's trying to get the care that he needs. And I'm trying to understand how we've even gotten to a place like that in this society. First, we got lack of patriotism from the people, and then welfare versus veteran benefits and veteran care.
Well, that's a big tank of issues right there. And delving into it, you really got to have a heart for this country, where we came from, how we grew, how we established the principles of this foundation, to really understand kind of what has been eroding, what have we been missing. You talked about patriotism first, and that's so near and dear to my heart. When Andrew, you mentioned the underground movement, for folks that don't understand what that is, we love the American Republic, and we want to celebrate the stories that made this country what it is. We want to highlight and talk about the greatness that had to happen in order for us to be who we are. We do that. We happen to do it in really comfortable, gorgeous apparel, and we try to put the best work together so that you've got a beautiful piece of our American story that you can carry with you, wear, and just enjoy. But it's a way of showing pride. Let me tell you why that's necessary. If we don't understand who we are, if we don't know our past, if we don't think about it in your family life, everybody out there, every listener knows their family. They know where they came from. And that's sort of the groundwork for establishing who you are in life. If you don't understand your background, your parents, your lineage, where your family hails from, traditions, the things that you followed, then you will lose your identity and quickly be consumed by whatever's in your environment. Well, in America, we've kind of lost our identity, right? We're not teaching it in the schools for 20, 30, 40 years. We've been apologetic. We've been apologizing for America's past. We've been, hung up on the things we did wrong without really highlighting the things we did right. Now, it's not appropriate to bypass all that you've done wrong, but in the history of republics, America is the greatest country in the world. And so we really owe our children, we owe our education systems a better perspective of how much we've done right. That's the number one thing to gain back that patriotism. Now, military.
But Hiroshima, we're sorry. Hiroshima, we're sorry.
We're sorry.
Right. I mean, it's remarkable that the president, is going to take the time to apologize in front of Prime Minister Abe in Japan for what we did in Hiroshima. We're not going to get a Japanese prime minister at Pearl Harbor apologizing for the attack on our ship and our sailors in that tragic time. The point is, Americans that don't feel that patriotism are not feeling it because our leaders, politicians, our teachers, educators have been talking about all that was negative. Imagine if you only spent time talking about your personal family and what they've done wrong, how your dad was this or your mom didn't do that, or you were abused in this way or that way. If all you were doing is consumed with what went wrong, you couldn't be happy with your past. You couldn't be happy with your family. It's the same thing in America. So that's number one. Now, I'm going to just tell you this. This is a challenge to us. We have to lead that. All right. Again, veterans know better than anyone else what's right about America. You travel overseas. You've been in the third world, emerging nation states, been all over Africa and North Africa and the Middle East. I'm going to tell folks out there that haven't done that, you got a great country. This is the best country in the world. And anyone that spent time in some of those places understands inherently there is something great about America. So the first thing is to really fall back in love with your country, but you can't do that if you're stuck looking at what we did wrong. So we got to highlight what we did right. Number two, you talk about veterans benefits versus welfare and things like that. And again, the American public doesn't really have a place to honor our veterans because they haven't been told about the sacrifices. They haven't been absorbed with the heroism of men like whether it's Sergeant York in World War I or Audie Murphy in World War II. We stopped telling those stories. There's a group of people that still love to hear that stuff, but our 4th of July parades, our Memorial Day parades, our parades honoring the veterans, you see a decrease in those because America has been consumed with apologizing for what we've done wrong. Man. We've got to turn that around. And that starts with dialogues like this. Veterans. Just focus on what's great about America. We'll get to the wrong too. But if you've traveled around the world, Germany, they don't spend a lot of their political breath, if you will, apologizing for what they did in World War II. Now, they've made amends. They've made memorials, but you don't see them bemoaning their mistakes. You see them trying to grow into the future.
Right.
America has to do the same thing. So that's our challenge. If we don't lead it, veterans don't lead it, it's probably not going to happen.
We've talked about this before, Jason. There's a 3-point aspect to rebuilding, restoring, and re-engaging America, and it pulls out all of these things. I remember we were sitting there across that desk up in the green room, and we talked about the historical, the philosophical, and the spiritual that needs to be restored in America. We don't even have people that want to philosophize anymore. They don't want to think about things. That's all philosophy means. It means to think things through. We don't want to think. We just want to do what makes us happy, right? That in effect, because we do not think things through, takes away everything precious about the pursuit of happiness.
Right.
Then the historical, man, what do we do if we don't remember where we came from? Audie Murphy. I was blessed to go. I remember when I was in ROTC, our ROTC competitions were at a big school in Aldine, Texas, out right outside of Houston. And the high school was Audie Murphy High School. And, man, you had to know who he was. You had to know what his ribbons meant that he wore on his chest. I mean, it was phenomenal to learn the pride and the aspect that these people had. And then, not even that's the philosophical, the historical, and then the spiritual side. And even those guys, I mean, George Washington himself, when he would stand before the military, he would say, we're going to give it up to the Father in heaven. We will give it up to the Father in heaven to deliver us unto this day a great victory. And, again, our founders saw the spiritual side, philosophical, historical, and spiritual. Without those three things, we fail. And I just don't. But I think you have two extremes on the spiritual, right? You have those people that want to be spiritual but not religious, and those people that are too religious to be spiritual, right? But we have some spiritual side to us. The historical, well, some people want to say, history, I watched a dude on Facebook. I watched this video. I might actually share it on my Facebook page. He went around in California saying we need more signatures on this petition for Hillary Clinton's vice presidential candidate. We're looking at Karl Marx. Would you support Hillary Clinton if Karl Marx was her vice president? And they're like, they go, who's that? She goes, oh, that's Karl Marx is her economic advisor. He's the current economic advisor to Obama, and she thinks that he'd be a fitting fit for the vice presidency. And these people are like on board, bro. Like they don't care. They're like, yeah, that sounds great. And they're signing this petition. The historical is completely lost. And that shows you in turn that the philosophical is lost. And we have to do contemporary things to re-engage that. And that's one of the things that I loved about your clothing line was it's a contemporary method to restore history. And one of the shirts that I saw on there that I really dug was it was the Liberty shirt, the white Liberty shirt, but it has like all kinds of little symbols in it that if you don't pay attention closely, I think there were some things in there. It makes you think about things to learn the historical. So those are the three legs that we had talked about that we've lost, man.
Well, you got me fired up.
I do. Come on. I know.
The Gospel Truth by
Oceans.
Can I add another leg?
No.
I don't know where this fits. Well, I'm adding one anyway. Well, first of all, if it was Groucho instead of Karl Marx, I might approve of it. But the other leg is family. Okay, you got to teach your children well. My kids respect our military because they saw me every time I passed somebody in fatigues. And sometimes it was women that were just hot wearing fatigues. But anyway, anytime I say a fatigue, they saw me go up to them and thank them for their service. And now they do the same thing. And I think to get an appreciation of the history, of the philosophical, you got to teach them first, to appreciate. Yeah. And that's a parenting responsibility in my opinion.
Yeah, we're really right inside the heart of what I love to talk about, and this gets heady, and some people just kind of want to tune it out. So I try to break it down and make it simple because none of us, we're all, soldiers, sailors, servicemen. We're the working, blue collar guys, girls, gals out there doing the work. But the truth is, we have to think a little bit past ourselves. When you talk about the philosophical, the spiritual, and the historical, that can seem a little intimidating. You talk about the family. We can really dial these things down in a way that's been captured by our ancestors and people that came thousands and thousands of years ago. The philosophers used to ask themselves a question, and they used to say, Plato, Aristotle, Solon in Greece, how do we govern best for most? How do we govern best for all? And the answers they continually came back to, whether it was Aristotle or Plato or Augustine or St. Thomas Aquinas or throughout our history, is the answer was something like, we have to be good ourselves, we have to be better ourselves, and that sometimes requires, most of the time, looking past ourselves to something that's bigger than me, something bigger than the ego. So most of our philosophical history at least stipulated one thing, which is that the person is driven by their own ego, by their own needs, by their self, the me monster, as some people like to call it. That person is not going to be as productive for society, for his community, than the one that's driven by things that are outside of him, traditions, rules, law, established sort of morality, ethics. Those are the things, virtue, honor, piety. That's what makes a person great for society. So the Romans and the Greeks, neither one of them were nations that you could say had a unified religion. They were all over the place, but they knew that the citizen individually had to first see themselves as part of the greater community and under a moral and ethical law. We took that through Christianity and the monarchy of Britain and London and establishing individual rights, and we maintain that balance. There's a great difference between the separation of Greece and Rome, where the Greeks were very kind of temporal and thought about themselves and the glory and thumping their chest, whereas the Romans thought, they would respect the traditions of their fathers, their grandfathers, and then their kids that would come after them. And this is what you're talking about when you talk about family. It's not just about you. It's about those who came before you and laid the groundwork. You wouldn't be where you are without the ancestors that put you there. And then it's about looking forward to the kids and the grandkids that will come after you. What can you do to make it better for them? Now, the scary thing is, that's it. That's the philosophy right there in a nutshell. Look past yourself, see yourself as part of a greater community. It starts with your family, but it also ends in the community and eventually at the country. Right. That's the philosophical piece. And if we lose that, we have people that are driven by their own individual desires or selfishness or ego. And that's when you get people who are focused on taking care of themselves and not others.
Jason,
then you add that historical piece and you can see your nation in respect to others. And you add the spiritual piece, for us to truly look at somebody else as important, it takes some humility. And I think most of us need that. I probably need it more than most, but that humility allows you to kind of lower yourself in the scheme of things and go, I'm a part of this, but I'm not the priority here. How do I serve others? You can't do that without having some spiritual grounding. And so these things combine to not just serve the individual, but to serve the community and to serve the family. That's how we go from heady philosophy and history and all these big topics down to a very individual way to really appreciate who you are, how we become better. And,
now Jason, you talked about the rules of like, that the philosophical and historical rules of governance and what all these people looked at, and the humility aspect, and we ourselves having to be good to lead. You learn all of those principles in the military.
Yeah.
Amen. Which brings me to a area of question or maybe controversy. I want to ask you this, and I want to ask you where you stand on this. Okay.
Okay.
Do you believe that a leader of the most powerful leader of the free world, being the President of the United States of America, should have distinguished military service?
Outstanding question. I think because our republic was set up very particularly, I appreciate the involvement that our founding fathers had in crafting the rules, if you will. And they did it for a number of reasons. It was never their vision to have military service to then also serve the community. And I'm going to say, in my opinion, I appreciate that. And there's a reason, because military service is a component to our life, to our society. But if you had a 360-degree circle, that can't be more than a portion of those degrees. And so we really gain fuller leadership from men and women who have been blended or balanced across that. Now, we can look and determine that a great deal of our military leaders that have come into post-military leadership have done a phenomenal job. You can argue that there's a system, if you will, of rules and training that really enables them to understand how to lead best, or lead well, I should say. But we don't want to preclude others who have done great work. Some of the great work in our countries are building families, building businesses, building education platforms. Sometimes it's serving people through means that may look a little non-traditional, non-government type organizations, or organizations that are serving community members. The critical components to leading this country, while they don't require military leadership or military service, I think we'll always benefit from that. So, I think our founding fathers did a phenomenal job of building the foundation for this thing. And it would be, I would be a really hard pressed to kind of contravene some of their greater decisions.
No, absolutely. Our founders had great vision, great perspective. I think Brian has a question kind of about that.
Well, no, not about that. But if you want to sum up that real quick, I got a couple questions that I want to hit them with.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've always said, and one of obviously, and I was shocked, to be truthfully honest, I was shocked that he did not go further in the 2016 primaries than he did. But and maybe it might be my Texas bias, but Governor Rick Perry, and he wasn't my initial guy, and he still isn't my guy that I would want for president. But one of the things that made Governor Perry, I believe, so successful as a leader in the state of Texas, and one of the most successful governors that the state of Texas has ever seen, was the leadership characteristics that he had, and the courage, the guts, the grit that we were talking about initially when we talked about this show, that came from constant years of military service. One thing I can tell you is that I am proud to be a veteran that lives in the state of Texas in the United States of America, because, man, Texas is a state that does care about its veterans, downright from our state government, but even to the people. There is that regard and that respect for the veterans here in the state of Texas, and I think that has to do with a lot of our leadership within the state of Texas has that prior military service aspect. But you're right, man. I just kind of wanted to get your perspective on it. I would never go against what our founders said, and I understand that our founders did not have that as a constitutional principle or as a lined out principle for leadership. But I think if I would, again, going back to the philosophical thinking about things, the historical, looking back at our history, and then the spiritual side, I think all three of those are best exemplified in American leadership when we've had leaders that have led through military service. So I think that's a great indication of somebody that can, will, and properly lead our nation. Now, some of them have messed up in the past. We've had some not so good ones, John Kerry and others like that. But it is what it is. But I think we have some pretty good indicators.
Donald Trump will do a fabulous job.
The interesting thing is our republic has this dialogue. Before we select a leader, we all get to weigh in. And the beauty of that is something that the English monarchy under Thomas Cranmer used to call kind of the middle way, where all these decisions that are outlying in the republic get filtered down to this sort of fine point where you choose your representatives. I love when William F. Buckley says he'd rather be ruled by the first 2,000 or 2,500 people in the phone book than the faculty at Harvard. And this is sort of an instinct, a gut instinct that, putting your trust in, we'll call it the population or the body politic in general, oftentimes has a result that you winnow out the extremities and you kind of get to this sort of middle way that represents a larger population. In our military leaders, what we found is we're going to find them sprinkled in our legislators, sprinkled in our House of Representatives, our state elected positions. And then when we have exceptional military leaders, we will elevate them to national level as well. But let's we want to remember too, one of the challenges for all of us that come out of the military is when you take that uniform off, you learn how to operate in a different type of world. And this is something that all of our leaders need to be aware of, which is, once you show the rank inside a military uniform, you generally get that command authority. Remember, we have different kinds of authority. Command. You can inspire people. You can lead through just an authoritarian sort of hammer and fist approach. But the real truth is, our military leaders learn something new when they become civilians and lose that rank and have to lead people from a complete voluntary position. This is one of the great things about business. Business in the marketplace force decisions to be made that are, one, they meet with the environment, and two, they're actually leading from a place of inspiration rather than command authority. So it's one of those great balance points that I think we get a military leader who's also spent time as a civilian or as a business person, or as inside the shoes of the common man without respect to uniform and rank. That's the type of person we're looking for. When we talk about leading a nation, we're really looking for characteristics or traits of people that have charisma. They know how to communicate. They are communicating with people, not at them. And too many times we get comfortable inside the military because we can rest on the authority of the organization or the rank rather than the authority of our convictions. So that's one of those small differences that makes a huge impact, if you will.
Yeah, cool. So I think Brian has a couple of questions for you that pertain to veterans issues that kind of segue on beyond this point, because they segue no longer into just the authority or the leadership of veterans, but it deals with how we encourage and how we take care of those veterans from a government perspective, but also a personal perspective.
And forgive me if I'm wrong here. I might be opening a whole can of worms that I shouldn't. But nonetheless, I mean, here's two prongs. I've got two things for you again, because I'm just getting in here. There's a lot of people on the show today, and I want to make time for everybody. We've got the educational front, which you were talking about with the kids being educated, what it means, American history, patriotism, stuff like that. But we have a minority liberal media controlling the majority of the people, and we have a liberal education system that's destroying, for the most part, destroying the patriotic American spirit within our school systems. So we got that right there. I'm going to let you get into that in just a second. But then I also have something as far as, I know that when we pay taxes, every one of us pays taxes for welfare and programs, Social Security, stuff like that. But I propose, and I know people are like, no more taxes, but I propose a veterans tax. A veterans tax where we pay into it out of our check, maybe cut some of those welfare benefits and stuff like that to people who really don't need it, and start putting money away for veterans, no matter how many years they've served, no matter what. I know we've got programs out there, but there needs to be more done for the veterans, and there needs to be an education for the children in the schools, and a proud spirit, a proud attitude when it comes to the people who serve our country. And that being said, I'm going to turn this over to you and see how you handle that.
Yeah,
Mr. Beardsley.
Yeah, those are fantastic prongs. I think the idea one of our education, that's a pretty, as you said, it's a pretty good size monster to tackle. Our education system has really left aside the heart of what made America great. We've been very focused in public education on how do we strip away or teach our kids that America is not exceptional, not the greatest country. That's a deliberate focus, and we've reduced our heroes, the icons that made us great, let's be reminded a little bit of what makes a national character, if you will. If you have a national character, in other words, the ideas and the things that your nation sort of collectively agrees to, then we all kind of aspire to that. We use aspirational characters to do that. In ancient Greece and in Rome, not everything they talked about were fact, and people knew that. Romulus and Remus were not, their stories are legend. The same with Greeks. They used the legends and the mythology, but they used a lot of those pieces as aspiration. What do we honor most? Is it truth? Is it virtue? Well, we used to do that in America with folks like, we talked about George Washington, his story of chopping down the cherry tree, and we honored truth. We talked about Abraham Lincoln, and we talked about Paul Bunyan and Baby Blue, this legendary story that's not real, or Johnny Appleseed that has seeds of truth in it. We were talking about aspirational ethos or character, and we've now gone away from that to really highlight again, those things that America has maybe done wrong or failed to do right. And so our aspirational character is now one of angst about who we are. What did we do to this population? What did we do to that population? Shouldn't we apologize for this? Why don't we go overseas and give other people a chance? Because didn't we take from others? And it's a real misread of who our founders and the men and women who really established the American Republic. It's a misread of who they were. Were they perfect? No. But are any of us perfect? Absolutely not. So do we highlight a character for his flaws or his perfections? And in art and literature, we can do both. But when we talk about inspiring, we ought to make sure we're inspiring on those things that are uplifting. Our systems have failed. Our public schools have been overwhelmed by people that want to talk about our failures. So our families now are left with the responsibility of digging in and kind of, we'll call it unwinding those stories, talking about the truth of those things in the greater context. That's difficult to do. Our families don't get as much time with our children as our public schools do. So people need to be aware that, when you send your children into these institutions for 18 years, and for 18 years or more, they're hearing all the negative stuff. It's going to be very difficult for them to come out with an appreciation for veterans, appreciation for America, appreciation for the world's greatest country. The second issue, you talk about a veterans tax. What I want to really highlight here is how government spends money. I'll make it short, but it doesn't spend it well. Like a drunken sailor, I was in the Navy, so I might have some familiarity with this. Like a drunken sailor, you give them a check and it's gone, blown, down in the piers, down in the docks, blown in the hollows of the back alleys in the streets. The government doesn't spend money well. Okay, we have a Veterans Administration whose budget has increased in the last 6 years, something like over $91 billion. It's about $163 billion, I think, at this point. And I think the request for the next year is $181 billion with a B dollars. Wow. $181 billion to take care of less than, I think it's 2 million vets or so. So we have a disproportionate amount of money that is set aside for veterans that's not actually being effective because the government, the Veterans Administration, spending it in the wrong place. One of the things Concerned Veterans for America does, the CVA, highlights a lot of that misapplication of funds. Why are we putting buildings in places that can't be used? And why aren't we taking care of veterans that are, waiting in line for 4 months, 5 months, 10 months? How do we take that money and target the veteran more effectively? And the answer is, if you put 20 government administrators inside that system, all 20 of them are going to get a little bit of that money and then pass some off to their favorite building or fund or some such thing. And the veteran comes last on that list. Wow. So the other day, Congresswoman from Washington proposed a bill, not a bill, but a draft discussion. Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rogers. And I'd really love it if your audience weighs in on it, especially veterans. It's a draft discussion that McMorris Rogers put together that really discusses some really foundational ways to change what the Veterans Administration is doing now. This is the end purpose, is to better care for those veterans. And she talks about separating the insurance from the care facility, the delivery of care, which happens in the buildings, happens in the doctors, happens in the the medications, separating that function from where the service member, where the veteran gets their insurance. So right now, veterans are being denied premium insurance that federal government employees, VA administrator employees, they all get this insurance, but our veterans are being denied that. So she's saying, let's give them a choice to opt into the premium health insurance program and then let them shop that insurance anywhere they want. And if they go to the VA, we'll take care of them. But if the VA is not taking care of them, they can take it elsewhere. That's a brilliant part of the program. But what I'm cautioning about is throwing more money at a system that doesn't spend well and then not following up to implement those things. We can look at government and bloated bureaucracies, and what we know is the more we funnel into that, the less chance that guy at the end of that benefit is going to get taken care of well. We're struggling today to change that system. So it's just a cautionary tale.
So here's a couple of things that I would encourage our listeners to do. By the way, you're listening to The Intersection, where faith, current events, and politics comes together here on Lanterns Radio Network. I'm not even going to play a sweep right now. We're going to keep the conversation going. Sorry, Chris, I know you're listening. But here's the thing. You said a couple of things that I want to go back to, but what America can do, because I think you made the same points, Jason, that I would make about a veterans tax. You know, why continue to feed this monster that is government right now when we already know they're not doing what they're supposed to do? Right. Especially me, from a perspective that I got a letter in the mail 3 years ago from the Veterans Administration that said, based on my federal tax returns, I'm considered a high income veteran and can pay for my own insurance. So the VA wasn't doing it anymore. What? Yeah, so that was a straight up gut check right there. It was awful. So that lets you know how your government feels about your veterans and your active service.
That's crazy.
But so I'm definitely not for a tax that supports veterans. But here's the thing: organizations like CV4A, Concerned Veterans for America, donate to them. Donate to organizations like the Warrior Angels Foundation, who is doing the care for TBI and PTS that actually cures TBI and PTS that the VA doesn't even want to talk about or assimilate with. Or let's just take it a step further into supporting men and women that are on the front lines of this battle from a government perspective, and go to tumshirts.com and order some shirts and put some money in Jason Beardsley's pocket so that he can continue doing what he is doing. And I mean that in all seriousness. That's the beauty of number one capitalism. But the other side of this is I know what Jason's doing with the income that he brings in, with what he does, where he travels, where he goes, what he says. I know that the money is used to advance our veterans' issues. I know that Jason is a guy that literally puts his money where his mouth is, or he wouldn't have started a shirt company like the Underground Movement. He could have started something like FUBU. But
why would you say FUBU, man? Why couldn't it have been Abercrombie?
I can't tell you. What I'll tell your audience is the beautiful thing about it is we've always spoken our heart's message through art, throughout the history, whether it's paintings or statues or stained glass windows. We tell these stories of the spiritual, the philosophical, and the historical threads of our nations, of our families, of our epics. We tell them through art. And what we've lost in the last 20 or 40 years are those men and women who really appreciate the American Republic for who it is, for what it is, who have been creating artistic expressions to remind and to uplift and to honor those stories. So when you talk about tumshirts.com, what we really wanted to do was say, if you're gonna go out there and share on your chest or run around in your college campuses with a Che Guevara or peace or an anti-war or some kind of like meaningless symbol, what we wanted to do is challenge that and say, we've got to replace that with something different that has some sort of tie or some sort of meaning that can uplift others. A little bit of a bona fides, we call it, where when you're out there, you think you're isolated, you think you're alone, you're the only one that loves this country the way it is, and you look across the way and you see someone else who's sharing those ideas because, if you're a Yankees fan, forgive me if you hate the Yankees, but you love them, and you see someone wearing a Yankees hat, automatically you get a little bit excited to see them, to say, hey, we wanted to do the same thing, but with America's team. America's team is America. Mm-hmm. We can all agree with that. You may hate the Yankees, but I think you probably love America. Yeah. Nobody was pushing those ideas in a way that was commercial, that was acceptable to millennials, because frankly, a lot of our icons, a lot of our art, a lot of our graphics, a lot of the things that we used to tell the stories of our country's past are old, they're outmoded, they're outdated. To be blunt, they're dorky, right? They're not cool. They don't track with kids. So if you don't come at it from a fresh perspective, you're not going to be able to inspire people or get them to kind of share those ideas out. So we have to give a makeover. You know, we have to take a George Washington and give him a makeover, modern makeover. We did something we're about to release called the Murder Line. It's a black on black, because we know how exciting that is. And it's a little bit of a subtle take on some of our heroic features, like Paul Revere's Midnight Ride, or Murdered Out Ted Roosevelt, Charlie of San Juan Hill, or Murdered Out George Washington. Why? Because we think kids, they need to have a better way to appreciate and approach their icons, their history. So we want to make sure that those things come they help us, one, reinvigorate that spirit of patriotism. And then you talked about how do people help at an individual level. I'm going to take it one step further. You talk about supporting great veterans companies. There's a bunch out there, Ranger Up, or Black Rifle Coffee, or Special Forces guys that are doing coffee or other things, or military members that have gone out to create businesses. Absolutely. Share some of your patronage with those guys. You'll be happy, and you'll be supporting men and women who have done one of the hardest fights, which is small business in America. Now, I'm going to tell everyone else, who I want to give you a challenge, because what's really sad is when we lose our veterans at 22 a day to suicide, what they're really looking for is someone to first and foremost wrap their arms around them, look them in the eye, and tell them how much that person means to them. You don't have to thank them for their service. That gets a little bit trite or old. But what you do need to do is look them in the eye and let them know you care about them. One of the things that we found is our service members now are having a hard time reintegrating. And one of the reasons is you go to war, you lose friends, people are dying on the battlefield. You guys know this. And you come back to America, an America that's not paying attention, doesn't know what your sacrifice was, doesn't care what you did out there, and your politicians sold your service for the easy political victory. So while you bled, lost friends, limbs, got injured, you come back home, you see your politicians fail you, and you look around at your community, and nobody seems to care. So those men and women are a little bit jaded right now, and they sometimes need you to kind of look at them, reach out, let them know how much you care about them, and then just listen. Maybe they don't want to talk about their service. Maybe they just need to know that they're part of a community that cares about them. To get people transitioned from hard service and wars that we're losing, and death and blood and violence on the battlefield, back to a community who's apathetic, largely forgets about the American cause, doesn't know we're at war. That's a challenge. So all of your audience members listening today, I'll just ask them, take time in your life to find those veterans that may be hurting. I know a gentleman, 67 years old, Vietnam veteran, and right now he's at that stage of his life that is sad for him. He doesn't know if people remember or respect his service. And we've seen this gentleman reach out for a hand up, or reach out for someone that cares about him. And the sad part is, if we're not there to welcome him in, this is the type of person that has a path that can lead down to the darkness, that leads a person to take their own life, or to check out even mentally, or to passively sit back from society. The only way we change that is that I, as an individual, you listening today, take time to listen to that person, understand their cause, have some grace, because you're going to need some grace. You deal with veterans, you're going to need a little bit of grace. They're salty. We've seen the world. We get a little bit bitter sometimes. We get a little jaded. So have some grace and share some time with them. We
Jason,
can do it in a lot of ways.
I did something that I learned from you, and I sincerely mean that. I saw you do it on the Defend Freedom tour, and I did it the other day. One of the things that I get to do a lot is when individuals don't have a home church. I have some good friends of mine that actually run a funeral home here, and these individuals that don't have a home church, when a veteran dies, they call me to come in and do their funeral, to console with the family and to share a message of hope with the family. And every time I've done in the past 2 months, I've done 4 Vietnam veterans and 1 World War II veteran funerals. And the Vietnam veterans, we have an honor guard that is the Vietnam Veterans of America Association that comes to do their the presentation of the colors and the folding of the flag and play taps and do those things. And I saw these guys standing around after the funeral service, after they performed their duties, and after I had given my message. And I walked up to them and I said, on behalf of my generation, I want to say thank you for your service, because you never got a proper thank you when you came home. And without fail, all of those men that were standing there, these are grown men, like you said, and getting into their 60s and beyond, they all just started crying, because they thought that, trying not to get emotional, they thought that nobody my age, they thought that nobody in my generation knew or cared anymore about them. And right. And just to hear those words from somebody that was under the age of 40, somebody that said, thank you for your service, because you didn't get that when you came home, it meant the world to them. Right. And you're right, though. It does, man, it gets monotonous all the time hearing somebody just say thank you for your service. But not only, I'm going to take it a step further than what you said. It doesn't get monotonous hearing thank you for your service. It gets it's no longer genuine. It's just, right. It seems like, you're just saying it because you've been taught or had to say it or whatever. Right. Yeah. Right. So just to say, man, we're here for you. We love you. We appreciate you. And again, I mean, some of us do not wear the scars of battle. Some of us came home with all of our legs and all of our limbs. So some of us do not come home from war that way. So when you think about when you think about those things, and you think about that aspect of when you think about those things and the way that happens. Hang on a second, guys. We're going through some tech stuff here again. There we go. I got one back. There's Jason. When you go through those things, though, you need to understand what people need to understand is that life continues to work in such a way that that you don't, it's not that you no longer identify with society. It's that you feel that society no longer identifies with you. And there's a difference to that needs to be understood. But I want to kind of shift it back to where this whole conversation had started, Jason, because I want to talk to you about something that's really interesting. We talked about the leadership not necessarily having to have had military service, right? And all of those things. This guy does not have any military service, but he has done something that no other, and I sincerely mean this with every fervor of my being, I have never, ever, ever seen a politician running for federal office do this. He wrote a contract and signed it and had it reviewed by attorneys. He wrote a contract to every veteran constituent in the state of Arizona, and he's running for state senate, or for the Senate. He's running against against McCain. His name is Alex Molesky. I want to read this contract to you, and I want you to tell me if this contract would make a difference to you as a veteran voter. If somebody made this contract, if somebody running, he says, this is what it says. It's not very long, but I want to read it to my listeners because it's pretty interesting. In order to fulfill the promises made to those who signed a blank check and to recognize the sacrifices made by our veterans and their families, I, Alexander Molesky, make the following commitments to our veterans and their families. In addition to living up to my oath of office and the constituent service, veteran services will be my U.S. Senate. Veterans service will be my U.S. Senate office and my campaign office's first priority. All Senate and campaign personnel will be directed to give precedence to any and all veteran service cases. Once in office, all in-state staff will be directed to open the official Senate offices in or around veteran hospitals, clinics, or centers in order to provide better service for all veterans. He explained that one to me because because the guidelines to have a state office for a federal official is it has to be in a government building. Well, the VA is a government building, and he said that's where his offices will be. He goes on to add into this, he says, to complete an independent review of the United States Department of Affairs to include all health, contracting, education, and benefits departments, to charge medical disability rating to the primary determining factor for medical records to theater of operation, MOS, and NEC, stop requiring the veteran to prove what was never entered into medical files, to complete a full and independent review of all VA facilities and personnel, eliminating red tape and redundancy, to reopen POW MIA investigations and hearings to include POW MIA families and assure all benefits earned by duty status are fully paid, to review burial methods, to review burial memorial benefits and cost analysis of maintaining cemeteries in Arizona and the United States, to evaluate and review PTS and TBI protocols as they relate to suicidal versus successful treatments of veterans from all wars, to conduct statistical data analysis of the success of the VA protocols for vocational rehabilitation and employment cost per veteran and results, to conduct survivor education and benefit program analysis and data of cost efficiency and failure. He kind of goes on and talks then about the benefits, to complete a full and independent review of pensions, all hiring, firing policies of the VA, to complete a full and independent review of the post 9/11 GI Bill, to compare a full and independent review of the Veterans Home Loan Guarantee Program, to complete a list of chemicals, toxins, and their effects on exposed veterans, including known effects veterans, spouses, children, up to 5 generations after exposure and damage to the veteran's DNA. To recognize integrative medicine therapy alternatives as an option from current VA protocols for using psychotropic drugs for the treatment of physical injuries such as TBI, spinal injuries, amputations. Signed this 7th day of December 2015, Alexander Molesky. And he went to every veteran's facility. Those are the first places that he hit, and he put one of these contracts in every veteran's hands. And he said, he said, they're not campaign promises. This is a contract. This is what I will own up to, legally binding. Yeah. 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 But no. man, I'm sold. I was sold at his first promise, at the first line of his contract, when he says, in addition to living up to my oath of office and constituent services, veteran services will be the U.S. Senate office and my campaign office's first priority. All Senate and campaign personnel will be directed to give precedence to any and all veteran service cases. Just stop there. Stop there. I'm sold. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I'll send that to you. I mean, that's just, I mean, I'd love to see more. I'd love to see more elected officials step up to saying, when it comes to my veterans, I'm willing to make a contract with you. I mean, that's phenomenal.
One thing I wanted to say,
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to say to you, Mr. Beardsley, real quick, is it's been an honor to be able to ask you questions and to be able to be on the same radio show as you. So I really appreciate the honor of being able to do this and be a part of something great such as yourself. And I appreciate everything you're doing for the veterans.
Yeah. Amen. Let me shift gears a little bit, and I want you to stick around for this if you still have time, Jason. All right, bro. I want to shift gears because I want to bring Jeff Dunetz into this conversation, but I want to talk about national security. Alex Molesky, yeah, I know all of his guys. I know his campaign managers, media managers. Yeah, I'll actually send you that. I'll let you talk to him about that. Here's I want to do, but I will send you guys the contract. I'll send y'all the link to that contract, and y'all can check that out. And here's where we want to shift gears, though. So Jeff Dunetz is a conservative blogger, podcaster, and such. He, like I said before about Jeff is one of my go-to guys when it comes to who he is and what he does, because Jeff is one of the authorities when it comes to the state of Israel and one of those things. And I'm not just saying that because he's Jewish. I'm saying that because he's put all of his background and all of his efforts into doing those things. So much so that guys like Glenn Beck have said when they need information on Israel and on what is going on over there, they go to Lid Blog. They go to the Lid to get that information. So that just kind of tells you the credibility. And not to mention, Jeff worked with one of the conservative icons that started this, as we would kind of put it, even in context of today's shows, that started this revolutionary movement. Jeff worked under Andrew Breitbart for a while. So anybody who knows who Andrew Breitbart is and the fight that Andrew Breitbart had, Andrew is the guy that pioneered the revolution that is conservatism as we know it today, with conservative firebrands and media voices rising to the top. So, oh yeah, I know your daughter too. Okay, so let me just kind of elaborate a little bit on Alexa. Alexa is when I go to Washington, D.C. and we do things like CPAC and Value Voter Summit and things like that, Alyssa is basically my personal assistant when I go to some of these things. She does all of my running around for me and actually pulls my show guests on and brings me my snobby water, as she calls it. She's an amazing, phenomenal person with a heart to serve, and that's the only reason that I like Jeff. But no. Well, there you go. But anyway, national security has taken a spotlight, or not, rather, let me rephrase. National security has taken a spotlight in the debate in our support for Israel and the Middle East and how we are interacting with the Middle East. And can you be neutral on your support of Israel, or do you have to take a side when it comes to Israel? What and I'm not even talking about from a Zionist perspective. I'm just talking about Israel in general, our strongest ally in the Middle East. But one of the things that I have not heard about, it's been kind of swept under the rug by the mainstream media. Just the other night, terror struck in Tel Aviv. Another terrorist attack by radical Islamic terrorists have hit Tel Aviv, have hit the state of Israel, the nation of Israel, and the media is not talking about it. Where is the flag of Israel that is painting Facebook profile pictures the way we did with France? Where is it the way that we did with all of with Brussels and all of those types of things? Where's the flag for Israel on Facebook profile pictures? I haven't seen that option when I got on social media the morning after that terrorist attack that says temporarily change your profile picture to this and put this filter on it. So here's the thing: when it what?
Is dominated by liberals, progressives, whatever you want to call it, then that's the reason behind the fact that a terrorist attack like this is not covered.
Well, when you think about when you kind of think about some of this stuff, and we look at all of these issues here, that are going on in America, mm-hmm. and predominantly in the Middle East and terrorism. When we look at these issues, Jason, I want to turn to you really quick and get your insight on this, because I want to get the details. Actually, let's get the details first, and then I want Jason to chime in on the nation of Israel. Give us the details, Jeff, first of this terror attack, because I shared it. I shared the links from your page as you were giving us information about this.
Two 21-year-old, probably Hamas operatives, who came from right outside the city of Hebron, and that's why they think it's Hamas, because that's Hamas stronghold. And if you want to think about what Hebron is that, for you folks who ever read Genesis, that's where that cave that Abraham bought, where all the patriarchs are buried in. So to give you an idea of what that is. Anyway, they walked into this restaurant that's in an outdoor marketplace in Tel Aviv. They ordered dessert. It's kind of like a dessert cafe. They're known for their chocolate desserts. And they had their dessert, and then they reached down into their bags, pulled out these some sort of automatic guns. They don't know if they were makeshift or whatever, machine gun type things, and just started randomly shooting. They didn't even pick targets. They just shot across. And they killed 4 people. They wounded 16 others, and about 6 of them in serious condition. What's interesting, and one thing that Israel is great at doing is that happened at 9:30 at night on Wednesday. Can you hear me? That happened on Wednesday night, and by Thursday morning, the marketplace was opened again, and people were having their coffee and chocolate at that restaurant.
Yeah. So, I mean,
but part of this though is that as of when I checked this morning at about 5:00 in the morning, the State Department made a statement condemning it, but President Obama or Secretary of State Kerry haven't mentioned it. And you have to go back to the Bush administration, Bush 43, which was the only presidency that considered a terrorist attack in Israel the same as a terrorist attack in the United States, in Europe, or whatever. And I'm not talking about, that the United States has to go send troops there, but at least they condemned them. And really, that was the only administration that condemned all attacks like that as terror. Certainly Obama hasn't.
So when it comes to that, again, that kind of brings up the question, and I want to turn it to Jason Beardsley. When it comes to our national security and Israel, I'm not even talking Zionist perspective. I'm not even talking about the people that believe we should be protecting Israel because that's still God's chosen people and so on and so forth.
Okay, can we just define Zionism? Because people get confused. Zionism is simply means that you support that there should be a homeland for the Jews. That's it. You don't have to protect them. You don't have to, that's just it. There should be a national homeland for the Jewish people.
Yeah.
That's what Zionism means.
But in the States today, that's been misconstrued as saying, well, now we have to defend that homeland as Americans, so on and so forth. So when you think about this idea, this aspect of what we've been talking about with this stuff, Jason, from a national security standpoint, I look at the strategical advantages of having Israel as an ally. They are the strongest ally that we have in the Middle East in fighting radical terrorism, and we are literally leaving them out to dry. As Jeff just said, even Obama himself has refused to or our Secretary of State have refused to consider and call this what it is a terrorist attack or condemn the terrorist attack. What do you think from this perspective? Because you've been there, done that. As your intro says, you were one of 9 times out of 10 in the deepest regions of our world when the Special Operations Group was there. You were the Master Sergeant there with the Joint Special Operations Task Force. So give us your insight, your intel, your counterterrorism knowledge on what you think is going on with all this stuff.
I appreciate it. Well, number one, too, I spent time in Israel, and we actually were victims of a terrorist attack in the Gaza Strip. Lost 3 good friends back in 2003 under the Bush administration. Very acquainted and familiar with it. I think for the audience, what is important to understand is this is a neighborhood, if you will, the Middle East, where our allies, traditional allies, our friends, and we're not. This, by the way, doesn't stop at Israel. This is our Gulf state allies. This is Israel. These are the Jordanians. These are, Arabs in the Saudi Arabian Peninsula and the Gulf Emirates. Our allies are being bullied by a regional power that is on the ascent, Iran. This Shia crescent that we've seen in the last 6-8 years or so, that's increased their power, their prowess, and has used that as a leverage, as a tool to pry or to peel off some of our significant allegiances in the region. And we see the results as chaos inside Syria, chaos inside Iraq, chaos inside of Yemen, chaos on the African continent in Egypt and Tunisia, all the way over to terrorism in places that spill out in West and East Africa. What I think is helpful to understand is how critical stabilization in this neighborhood really has been successively for decades on end, as our presidents have stood up one after another to support one of the most stable linchpins in this neighborhood. We have now seen a tectonic plate shift sort of politics that has sort of now ignored and dismissed our traditional allies, Israel and some of these other Gulf state Arabs and the Saudi Arabians, and has thrown our weight, or the balance of our weight, politically from the bully pulpit and in our contract form with the Iranian nuclear deal into the wrong neighborhood. So what we're seeing is the ascendancy of a regional hegemonic power, Iran, through their Shia network and their counter-terrorist or their terrorist network that is global in nature. It's a clandestine network. They've been at war with the West for many, many decades. What we saw in Israel the other night was a real outbreak, again, of some of that war. If we ignore it, as we are doing under this current administration, we can look for more chaos like we've seen in Egypt, like we've seen in Yemen, like we've seen in Syria or Iraq. There is no end to this, but because you have the traditional stable allies that we've backed that are now looking for support, and they know they have not been able to count on the United States under the current presidential administration, and so they're really looking to kind of hold ground where they are and wait for the next election. Our allies are looking for leadership. Our leadership has turned a blind eye to them.
Let me add two things. Number one, and people say, what has Obama accomplished in foreign policy? Well, one thing he has done is, because of that Iran deal, he's gotten Israel and Saudi Arabia talking, because they got so many back channel things now because they hate this deal. But more importantly, it's not even that he's ignored stability. He's actually worked against it. For example, in Egypt, forget the politics. The only thing that's really keep the country stable is the military. And when they got their new president and threw out the Muslim Brotherhood, he actually stopped with the aid packages. Now think about this for a second. Before the peace deal between Israel and Egypt, that whole region were satellites of then the USSR. In the last couple of months, since Obama moved us away, from Israel and moved us away from countries like Egypt, the day before the terrorist attack, Netanyahu was in Russia, and they've been meeting all the last few months. Egypt is meeting with Russia. All these countries are moving back towards Russia the way they were in the 60s and 70s, and that's really thanks to Obama, and that's a bad thing, because
consolidation of power. You're right, under a new axis, and that's not inappropriate. We need to watch it carefully. It's Libya, it's Syria, it's
Iran,
Saudi Arabia, and now they're all shifting because they can't trust the powers in the West. We haven't fulfilled our strategic national security obligations, and I kind of want to highlight.
Even worse than that, though, they don't think we have a backbone.
Well, listen, we've demonstrated that. Let's talk about those security obligations real quick, because that's a part to this. We talk about security obligations where the United States determines that we will commit to a country all along Eastern Europe. We failed over the last 4 years to live up to those security obligations. So when in the 1994, I believe it was, we signed a deal with Ukraine, give away your nukes, we'll protect you. They gave away their nukes. And you watch the Soviet Union Russia under Putin roll over Crimea and roll into Ukraine. We have retracted. When we said we would put missile defense systems in Poland, the Czech Republic, down in Romania and Hungary, Putin said, no, we don't want you to do that. We retracted. We gave in. Our security obligations in Europe have failed. Our security obligations in the Middle East, we have released or let go of. So now most of our allies that were traditional are looking to the U.S. as a country that has failed to live up to our security obligations. That's where you're looking at them now, Israel, Saudi Arabia, other states, now throwing their weight in the side of the sphere of the Iranian and the Russian axis. That's a dangerous thing for the region. It's a dangerous thing for the United States, and it opens the floodgate to more terrorism. What people need to understand, you talk about an incident where two young 21-year-olds go into a cafe and shoot people up. This is no different than in West Africa and East Africa, in Paris and in Luxembourg. What you're dealing with is a state sponsor of terrorism. They have the money. They flood the zone. They have a global network of clandestine cells that can support, inspire, monetize, or facilitate this type of terrorism. And the United States, frankly, is behind in this game. Europe is the sort of if you will, the canary in the cave, the sort of indicator of what we're going to be looking at in the future. And right now, Europe is a mess. Unchecked immigration, people that are flooding the zone. We saw the other day a van full of weapons and explosives headed to a European sports venue. We're going to be dealing with this more because what's happening in the Middle East is we've taken a leadership role and we have pulled back, and we have actually given that leadership over to chaotic, despotic, hegemonic tyrants and authoritarians who will seize the vacuum that we leave there. They'll do that.
And actually, it's kind of more than that, because I remember when I was growing up, my mom used to say, if you ever see an angry dog, don't show them you're scared. They'll get angrier.
Yeah.
Terrorist organizations and fanatical Islamists are the same way. And when we show that we don't have a backbone, they say, great, we're going to go after them more.
Right.
So by not defending ourselves, by drawing red lines and not following through, by abandoning our allies, what we are showing the terrorists that our government, certainly not our soldiers, but our government, are cowards.
Again, yeah, you mentioned it. The service members, the commanders, they've honored the republic. It's the politicians that betrayed them. And you're
Exactly.
that scared dog idea. You know, we're not just seeing it. I want people to understand how the nation states and the policies at the national level affect these terrorist non-state actors. We have had flyovers, close calls with our naval vessels in the Baltic Sea, in the China Sea, in the Black Sea. In other words,
heck, Iran took our sailors and we gave them $1.7 million.
That's right. That's right. When you see American sailors on their knees, Andrew, I'm going to tell you something.
Yeah.
When an American sailor's on his knees, he ought to be praying to God, not under threat of hostage situation by Iran.
That's right. Amen.
We did nothing about it. We did nothing about it.
I don't think we should be going right into fighting people. I think we do it a little too much.
Yeah.
However, when somebody captures our sailors and tries to humiliate them, okay, there should be bombs dropping. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, look, here's the thing, and I want to go with what you said, Jason. You know, when our guys are on their knees, you know, again, they should be praying, not in a state of being in the hands of our enemy. And if they are in the hands of our enemy and they are on their knees in symbolism of surrender, that reflects to the entire world that America in itself has effectively surrendered. You definitely don't do exactly what Jeff just said. You don't go give them $1.7 million. You don't go, you don't do any of those things. But here's the thing. And Jeff, I want to say, you know, to this point of what you said, we don't need to be going in and fighting everyone. And this is going to go back to what we were talking about earlier with Jason, the historical side. Last show, I had talked about the American Revolution and how our founders went through every process conceivable before ever firing a shot during the American Revolution to try to secure American independence. Violence was their last resort, and they did not fire back until they were fired upon. However,
but what we're not doing is we're sending our people into danger, and we're not giving them the tools or the rules of engagement to let them win.
There you go. And that's what I was going to say, Jeff. It kind of, but to go to the second point and to go to what Brian was saying earlier and what Jason and I were talking about is this is important, and people need to understand that we aren't going into the battlefield to win anymore. There was no second guessing after World War II who won the war. We knew it was definitive. It was a victory. We won. Who's won the war in the Middle East? Anyone? Has anyone? Because we're still there. It was, I mean, I'm looking at a flag right now that's hanging in my office. It's matted. It's hanging. It's an Iraqi flag. And I had it embroidered with my name on it and the LSA Anaconda where I was stationed, and all of my guys signed the flag, and I had sent it home in a care box back to my parents. So with some of my personal belongings. And when I got home, my mom had this framed and matted for me, and it's hanging in my office now. But that says 2006, 2007. That was 10 years ago. That was 10 years ago, and we are still there.
Still fighting. I was right there with you. Spend time in Iraq watching as our policymakers were coming up with ambiguous, nebulous goals that did not include smashing the enemy and complete victory. I want to remind our audience of something. The smart audience again. We talk about World War II as the greatest generation. People say that, but I think ironically, they don't actually know if they mean that. And here's what I mean. World War II, we won victories in two theaters against Japanese imperialism and Nazism on the continent of Europe. And I want people to remember that when we talk about the greatest generation, we have to be careful about what we mean by that. Those guys, remember, leveled entire cities. We dropped bombs on Dresden, Nagasaki, Hiroshima. We went full and total war at that point. And we had an incredible victory. So the important thing I think we ought to remember is when we talk about the greatest generation, if we mean it, we cannot then condemn those type of activities that our grandparents did. In other words, we either support what they did and say, yes, it was a great victory and they were a great generation, or we say, no, we don't agree with how they won the war, and therefore we don't believe that they were the greatest generation. Now, I'm in the camp that believes, yeah, an amazing victory, great generation. The reason I bring that up is right now we are doing limited warfare, constrained warfare, handcuffed warfare by a group of political elites, and frankly, sometimes military elites who have given up the cause of complete war. In other words, we've told ourselves we can conduct warfare in a limited manner and still have victory. But I'll also remind the audience that we haven't had a major ground victory apart from the Persian Gulf since the end of World War II. And that includes Korea, Vietnam, and now two conflicts, both in Iraq and Afghanistan. So the point is, if you want to challenge that precept, you have to understand or determine for yourself, what does it mean to actually conclude a victory? Jeff, you mentioned that, we're fighting with our hands tied. We don't need to go willy-nilly into every fight. And Andrew, you bring up precisely a great point. The redress of grievances and every political mechanism we had before we went in shots fired in the Revolutionary War were a phenomenal amount of diplomatic, we'll call it obeisances, diplomatic options. We have to exhaust those first. But when they are exhausted, just as Churchill said after Gallipoli, if we decide to go to war, that decision has got to be done slowly. It should be a long process. But once we make the decision, the actual action, the execution of war has to be as short as possible, and that requires violence. It requires something that is frankly a little bit, we'll call it discomforting. If we're not discomforted at war, I will tell you this, we will not win these wars. And when our commanders in chief stand up and tell you, or our military commanders tell you that we can't win this regional conflict, or we need other people to do it, or we can't do it on their own, don't listen to them. That's hype and it's nonsense. The American military is the greatest military that's ever been formed in the history of the world. If we wanted to destroy the enemy, if we wanted to have a complete victory, it's available to us. That doesn't mean that our population is ready to stomach it, but I don't want people to be confused. If we go in half-hearted, we're going to be returning veterans from a lost, failed conflict, wounded, injured, and dead in the thousands, which is what we've got right now. So to Jeff's point, when we decide to make those decisions, they need to be decided with complete conviction. The American people need to be involved, and the entire legislative body needs to put their political careers at risk the same way our military service members are putting their lives at risk. If you want to come home with victory, that's how you do it. This mealy-mouthed, soft-handed sort of plant-eating ethos of how we do limited warfare is failing.
And you don't send our heroes into danger unless you're going for a victory.
Yeah.
There's no other reason. That's the really stupid part. I always refer to movies. And in Rocky 2, Rambo 3, excuse me, when he was sending him back to Vietnam to get some MIAs. If you remember, one of the best Sylvester Stallone lines was "Sir, this time can we go there to win?" That's it. You don't put people in danger into a fight without trying to win. Because with this incredible fighting force we have, with the incredible people behind it, we will win.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you're putting them into danger for no reason.
You know, I was thinking about, Jeff, when you were talking, and when as Jason was giving his point about, you know, we're all talking about the necessity of victory, and then we talked about the exhaustive efforts prior to violence. But it got me thinking about Chris Kyle. Chris Kyle started, for those of you that don't know who Chris Kyle was, he was the most successful Navy sniper, or American sniper, as you've seen the book. I was thinking about Kraft International, the private security firm that he had started when he came out of the SEALs. Their motto was, "Despite what your mama told you, sometimes violence is necessary." And you know, and it's true, you know. And as much as we would like for John Kerry to travel around with Paul McCartney and a guitar and tell the world it's going to be okay, sometimes violence is necessary, and we have to be.
Well, you know what? War is ugly.
You've got
It's very ugly. It's not PG rated.
I look at
we admit to violence being necessary when we arm our police officers. In every community, we have a tacit, implicit admission that violence at times is necessary.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you wouldn't have the police force. That's it in a nutshell.
And any one of us, if somebody was going to attack our children, wouldn't hesitate to commit violence. And the way I look at it is when our fighting force goes out to protect this country, what they're doing is protecting my children, just as if those terrorists or those bad guys were across the street from me and about to attack my household.
I kind of feel like America's like that kid in the schoolyard who's going out trying to play with the tough guys, but doesn't realize what's getting ready to happen. You know, we kind of like stroll across the playground, and then when we get picked on, we're like, "Oh man, come on, what'd you do that for?" And it shouldn't be like that. It should be we go out there, we're the star quarterback. You know, we're out there, everybody likes us, everybody wants to be around us, and that's what it is. But we're going out there like that little, no offense to any geeky kids out there, but that little dorky kid, like Paul from Wonder Years, you know, going out there like Paul from Wonder Years. And that's not who we are. You know, when I think about NATO, and I'm not against NATO, so take this in context. You know, I'm more of the funny guy on the show, but, you know, I think NATO, who's NATO? And I feel like the world is looking at America like that. America? Who's America? You know, and when they can pick on us and we don't do nothing back, I mean, as long as the show ends where, you know, like the Karate Kid, where the Karate Kid gets picked on, and then he kicks everybody's butt in the end, that's fine. But I don't feel like, with the Obama administration and the way the direction of America's been going, that we're even setting a precedent or an image like that to the rest of the world, that we will defend and protect people. We've given up on Israel.
Obama doesn't value our soldiers. You know, you look at the fact that if you look at the pictures of George Bush when he went to visit the soldiers, he was always in the middle of them, shaking their hands, hugging them. I have pictures of Obama where he's reaching across a fence to shake their hands. Or he went to the funeral of, or he sent people to the funeral of that kid who ended up, the one near St. Louis.
Right.
That turned out he robbed a store before he attacked the cop and he got shot.
Right.
But no one went to Chris Kyle's funeral. No one. And this is a guy who not only worked for the country overseas, but he got shot by someone who had an illness from fighting overseas because he was trying to help the guy.
Let's take that a step further.
Wasn't helping the guy.
Yeah, take that a step further.
Go ahead, Jason.
We brought back Ty Woods and Glenn Doherty and Sean Smith and Ambassador Stevens. we didn't uplift and honor them. Our State Department got caught for 3 and 4 weeks wrangling around a mouthpiece of lies to kind of disingenuously convince the American population that the terrorist incident had nothing to do with terrorism, but rather a movie that was fabricated out of California. That was disingenuous. What we see now is you see the rise of Trump, and people want to know why he's popular. As you mentioned, this is you see America as the kid in the sand, getting sand kicked in his face, and the big hulking guy coming over, whether it's Putin or Iran or whether it's the chaotic mess in Syria. This is us now looking for someone who will stand up to that bully and say, hey, we believe in American strength. When folks are not clear on why Donald Trump's message has been sort of elevated to the point that it's at now, I think it's interesting to look at years and years of acquiescence, years of obeisance, years of bowing down to sort of a complicity and apathy in the face of world tyrants, and one guy that comes up as vocally and bombastically, rudely and crassly as possible and says something really phenomenally controversial, like America ought to be great again, or our military is the greatest power in the world. And people are not sure why that's popular. It's because a lot of people are tired of feeling kicked in the sand. They're tired of feeling like weaklings. Does that make him the right candidate, the best candidate? Well, that's for each individual to determine. The point here is rather about the ethos or the national spirit. We're in a place, we talked about losing our history. We're in a place where we are bemoaning or apologizing for who we are, and Americans, I think, are tired of that. At least a population, a set of those population are, and those people are standing up saying, you know what, I'm tired of apologizing. We're tired of saying we can't call the enemy fundamentalist, jihadist, Islamic jihadist. Choose your name. This is a strain of jihadism that's been around for 100 years. This is not stage 1 in the war. We're at stage 4 in the war. They've gone through inception. They've gone through latent incipiency. They've had terrorist hijackings all throughout the 70s. From Munich to Aquila Laura to the bombing of Lockerbie and places like that. This network of fanaticals who hate the West did not just start on 9/11. They attacked the World Trade Center before, and there's a chain of sequences that you can go back historically and define, from Hassan al-Banna to Syed al-Qutb and the Signpost, all of their writings, all of their inspirations funneling into people like Dr. Zawahiri and Osama bin Laden, and men who are inspiring the same type of people to attack and destroy something that we should cherish, which is Western civilization. But don't forget, our Western allies have forgotten that. France has kind of forgotten who they are. Germany, they've forgotten. Germany over the Christmas holidays was struggling internally to define what was happening on their streets when men from populations of immigrants or others were in the streets raping and sexually assaulting their citizens. Germany couldn't even say that because they didn't quite want to label it what it was. France wasn't sure that they could fire people that were working at the airport that were already declared jihadists. Luxembourg was trying to be much more open, trying to be hospitable to these communities that were locked off and isolated, and dealt with the blows of that. In America, we're dealing with the same thing. We don't know if we can call the enemy what they are. You get into San Bernardino, we're not quite sure we want to label it terrorism, and it took us 2 or 3 days for the president to say that. And just like Jeff pointed out, day one, we have a police officer in Boston who knocks on a professor's door, and the president's out on the bullet telling us why the police are wrong. The day that Ferguson happened.
Actually, he said stupid, not even wrong.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Called him stupid. The day Ferguson happened, the president wants to compel the United States to be apologetic for being racist. The day Trayvon Martin gets shot, we're told by the president that that could have been his son. That could have been, this is happening all over. Every single time there's a choice for the politician, for the leader to divide the country, he chooses to divide. And every time we have a choice, just like Jeff said, to uplift and honor a Chris Kyle or a Glenn Doherty or, the SEAL that died recently and the Special Forces guy up in Afghanistan, Marjan province, those people are not being honored when they're brought back home. And so we can see that divisiveness is a cultural thing. Now, the way to change that is leadership. And if we don't get involved in the voice of our electorate, our constituency, doesn't select guys like, what's the gentleman's name in Arizona? Molesky?
Molesky. Mm-hmm.
That kind of character, that kind of leadership is required now. So more than ever, when we connect all these dots, you see terrorism, you see our allies in Israel faltering and looking for a leader in the West. They know that they can't look to the United States right now. When you see the Saudi Arabians, the Egyptians, and everyone looking up to Putin now because he's the strong man in the region, we know that we have released our obligation of leadership in the world. And I will tell you, I'll remind the audience, when the United States is involved in the international theaters, the world is much more stable.
Yeah.
When the United States is aggressively involved, we live up to our security agreements, whether they're in Europe, whether it's with NATO, whether it's in the Middle East. That's when the world does best. We've got to get back to that place.
So let me ask you a question.
Can I just add
Jason?
one quick thing before we go? Because we started talking about Israel. There's one thing that people don't realize about Israel. Israel never wants anyone else to fight for them.
That's right.
Right.
Okay? They don't want American soldiers involved. They don't want any soldiers. And it's not because they don't trust them, but because their thing is that they need to do the front lines work to fight their own battle. So when people kind of say, well, Israel wants America's help, yeah, financially sometimes, but really what Israel wants is America to get out of the way and let them do what they want.
Yeah.
I just want to ask Jason or even Jeff or even Andrew. My question is this, and I'm coming from just the general population. In a world that seems so dark, in a country in its turbulent times right now, is there hope? Is there hope?
Yes.
This is the greatest country in the world with the greatest people in the world.
I gotta jump in on that. That's the best part, and I speak to audiences all the time. By the way, it doesn't feel like that. And when people are isolated, when they don't have a community to share their feelings, they don't feel like there's hope. That's part of the reason I started the underground movement, is to make sure people knew you have others that feel the same way you do about brand America, the greatest country in the world. The hope comes. You can watch it historically. I love Tacitus, Livy in the first century Rome writes this great quote. I'll butcher it, but he says, the greatest medicine for a sick mind is the study of one's history, because through it we can see everything good and everything bad. In other words, we can apply a fix that will work. So historically, was there hope when Europe was under the dark oppression of a regime or an autocracy? Was there hope in London when the breath of liberty was snuffed out and people were forced to worship in a way that didn't meet with the man's internal sort of self idea? Well, yeah, there was hope because a band of people left there and started what is now America. They did that because they knew that the breath of liberty had to breathe free. The same thing in 1500. Mid 1500s, Martin Luther stood up, changed the world at a time that it wasn't easy. In first century Rome, you, Andrew, I think you'll know this as a pastor, these are men and women who are suppressed, oppressed, underground, hiding, eaten by lions, for sport, yep, who are thriving and driving the church across the continent, across the empire. Was there hope then? They were in a much more despondent situation than we are now. So absolutely there's hope, but what it requires is the voice of reasoned people who can connect with each other, communicate, build that community, and know that with our connectivity, with our togetherness, with our strength, we can make changes, positive impact. It can happen. I'll take you back to something closer. 1979, 1978, gas lines, oil crisis, OPEC was a mess. The United States was not respected around the world. Our president had lost a lot of prestige. We had 444 days of our embassy in Tehran was under hostage siege. And that was 1979. In 1980, the world changed because of one leader who stood up and said, America is great. You get to something like the Miracle Game on Ice, our hockey team. You get to, a place where 9 years later, Gorbachev tears down the wall between the Soviet Union, the Soviet Empire, and the West. Was there hope? A guy like Lech Walesa stood up under Solidarity and said, here's hope. We see it happen all the time with individuals. We see it happen in local, small places. So, yeah, that's my answer. Absolutely, there's hope. And it requires men and women that are patriots, that love this country, remember who she is, and have fallen in love with her, and begin to shout that loudly in their everyday life. Again, that's why we started the underground movement. That's why Concerned Veterans for America fights for veterans having a voice, because there's always hope. As long as I have breath in my body, as long as I'm breathing, there's hope. Okay, I won't.
And Jason, you mentioned Reagan. Here's the thing about Reagan that people don't get. You know, people talk about his policies or whatever. When Reagan was president, he made every American feel that we can walk on water. We could walk through walls. We can do anything because we are Americans.
That's right.
Now compare that to a president who starts his administration by apologizing for all the great things we've done.
You nailed it,
okay.
Jeff.
So really, it all comes down to leadership.
Yep. I didn't know Blake was... Absolutely. So check this out, guys. When we consider all of these things that we have been talking about, all of these things that are going on, we have to assert that, number one, America's a great nation. And what makes America a great nation is great people. And you have to be willing to go to bat for a nation, not because you want to fight, but because our nation is great. One of the things, and I have a shirt on the front that says veteran across the chest. And the back of the shirt says, I did not fight what was in front of me. I fought because of what was behind me. And that's talking about your family. It's talking about your friends. You know, when our founders founded America, they did something that's phenomenal. And I want to call the listeners back to this, okay? Because it was these statements, these very statements right here, that made the profound impact that founded the greatest nation on earth. They looked at one another. And they said, we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. They pledged that. They mutually pledged to one another their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor. And except we do that again as Americans, we will fail. But when we do continue to look to the hope that is America, we look to the leaders that are seeing an exceptional nation. We look to leaders that are willing to stare terror in the face and say no more. We look to a America that has men and women of valor that are not scared to speak when it is necessary to speak. They are willing to look at the principles taught to us by men like Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. And those men take that, then women take that to heart. They stand up and they fight back, be it within a system or be it within boots on a ground in a foreign land somewhere, defending the greatest nation that has and will have ever existed. We have hope. We have hope, and we look to one another, and we must again say, I pledge to you my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor. Guys, you've been listening to The Intersection. This is the place where faith, current events, and politics, it all comes together. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at Church Patriot. You can follow Brian Lane at Dunamis1 or The Bad Christian. You can follow Blake Reynolds, who has been around. You can follow Blake Reynolds. You just type in Blake Reynolds, literally, like Blake Reynolds is out there everywhere. And you can follow him, Blake Reynolds. You just type it in. It'll come up on Twitter, Facebook. He's tagged in all of the posts that we put out for the show. Brian's tagged for all of those. And for today's show, you can actually find tagged Jason Beardsley and Jeff Dunetz. Jeff Dunetz, you can find and read all of his content and updates about the terrorist attack in Tel Aviv at lidblog.
Or politics.
lidblog.com. or faith, lidblog.com, lidblog.com. And you can find Jason Beardsley on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, Jason Beardsley. And you can also, again, you can find him and more about him and his company at the TUM Shirts, TUMshirts.com. It's the underground movement. Shirts.com, TUMshirts.com. Go check out those amazing shirts. Guys, thank you again for coming on the show. Appreciate having both of you.
It was an honor to be here. Let's love on America.
That's right, man. Let's love on America. Guys,
love America.
There you go. For myself, for Brian and Blake, and the rest of the Intersection crew and our special guest, we bid you God bless, Godspeed. We're out.